Hey, this is the Well Advice Channel 2. What I want to talk about today is the topic of the problem with grassroots movements. Now, when it comes to grassroots movements, such as Black Lives Matter, Me Too, and so on and so forth, the problem with grassroots movements is that they don't work, simply put it, because they don't have a leader, okay? And that's the problem with grassroots movements. Because the truth of the matter is, as I'm certain anyone in the world who knows anything about the world, and let alone history, is that civilizations, okay, and I'll just use civilizations as an example of, of how to run things, obviously, because this is a perfect example of how to, run things, properly, since the idea of running a civilization covers everything, when it comes to humans, let alone humanity for that matter, because when you talk about politics, it covers really everything, since all of us humans, anyway, in the modern world, at least the majority of us, at least us who are prosperous in civilization anyway, for that matter. So what would be a better example to use than, of course, civilization example, to compare, with, of course, something like grassroots movements, if anything. So I'll use civilizations as an example. And when it comes to civilizations, one thing that we have definitely realized, us intellects in general, let alone, of course, scientists or historians more like it and all that stuff, is that civilizations that tend to thrive and actually do well and become the most prosperous, successful, and so on and so forth, tend to have one common trait, which is that they have a leader, okay, versus a group of people making a decision. And the reason why having a leader is so important is that leaders, unlike having a group of people make decisions, can give straightforward answers as to what you want to do, let alone your ideology, like I was saying before, ideology, and so on and so forth. They give straightforward, freaking answers to things, okay? Especially when it comes to things that are extremely important, like there's an emergency going on, we're going to do this specific thing, okay? Or, whether it's an emergency in regards to, like, we're being invaded, or, like, we have massive financial problems, and so on and so forth, or, or maybe we have a disease, whatever you can imagine, they give straightforward answers. We're going to do this, we're going to do that, we're going to do this, we're going to do that. That's how they go. Okay? But when it comes to, of course, groups of people, they don't have a fucking, and yes, I'm going to swear because it's mad annoying, they can't come up with a fucking answer for things, when it comes to civilizations that existed in the past, they can't give a freaking answer. Everyone has their own interpretation, everyone has their own vision, and so on and so forth, and as a result, they can't give concise answers, and even if they do, the results will always be mediocre compared to a civilization that actually has a leader. And don't get me wrong, I'm not saying that we should go back to like an authoritarian nation, where people won't have the right to vote and stuff, and all that type of stuff, like fascism, like Adolf Hitler and all that type of stuff. But what I'm referring to, if anything, is the idea of an actual, nation that has a leader. You can still have a democracy and have a leader as a nation, for the people of the nation, to be more exact, okay? Versus having a group of people make decisions. And as you always realize, when you have a group of people make decisions, things tend to not really go anywhere. There's constant fighting, constant arguing. People won't have a freaking answer, and so on and so forth, and everything's all over the place. And when it comes to grassroots movements, it is no different, okay? Whether it's Black Lives Matter, Me Too, and so on and so forth, they always collapse, okay? And even if you go further back in time, like Occupy Wall Street and all that type of stuff, going way back in time, they always collapse then too. And in the modern world, it's even worse, because now we live in the age of the internet, and not just the age of the internet's bigger than it's ever been, even compared to the Occupy Wall Street movement. So now everyone can put their voice into things, and because everyone can put their voice into things, you tend to actually see just a lot of drama as a result, and a lot of infighting, and a lot of issues, and so on and so forth, which obviously, can cause problems when it comes to how well the thing is organized, and so on and so forth, and let alone people who interpret things different ways, okay? Because the truth of the matter is Black Lives Matter, let's use Black Lives Matter, perfect example of why grassroots movements do not work, is Black Lives Matter believes, in the beginning, that it was just simply about dealing with the amount of excess racism we had to deal with from the police as Black people in general. That's what they had to deal with. That's what it's about in the beginning. But then people turn into different sorts of things because it was a grassroots movement, let alone a movement. So people interpret things differently. And because there was no leader, of course, there wasn't anyone to say this is exactly what we stand for, this is exactly what we are about, let alone, gives exact solutions to problems. Like, okay, this is exactly what we're going to do to resolve the problem. So as a result, it collapsed. Everyone, for that matter, when it comes to speaking on this particular topic, just didn't have, or say as a group, as a whole, it just fell apart because there wasn't a really concise belief or opinion for it to stand for. Is it about talking about police brutality, or is it fighting against an anti-white, or is it an anti-white organization? Is it a fighting against the racism in the establishment? Like things like that, or things like that. Because people couldn't come up with a fucking idea. And yes, I'm swearing because it's mad anyway. Okay, like I said before, okay? And that's the truth of the matter. People couldn't come up with an idea. Everyone has their own ideas, it's their own vision of what it is supposed to be about, and they miss the main point of it. Can we just simply have less police officers treating our people like shit? As Black people like shit. And that's exactly what they're not willing to freaking figure out. That's all Black Lives Matter was at its fundamental core. Okay? Can we have the police not treat us badly like they were treating us before, okay? But later on, it became things like, okay, we should focus more on rehabilitating people, instead of actually having people, let's say people cause problems, arrested. Let's focus on gang member rehabilitation instead of actually focusing on, okay, let's have this person arrested. Look at what happened then. So that is an example of exactly what I'm trying to get at here, okay? Is that when you have a group of people making things and things just happen organically, you will never have something that's well organized. And even if it does well, it's not going to be as good as it could be, You need to have a leader for everything, okay? And I'm not against movements, but you need to have a leader who represents the movement, okay? Who tells people this is what we stand for, this is what we believe in. Because if you don't, then everyone's just going to form their own independent opinions on things, and you're always going to have that small percentage of people, like everywhere in the world you go, but specifically in a situation like this is the worst situation to do it in, who add their own opinions to things, and because they add their own opinions to things, and they're people who don't really think logically, and let alone reasonably, like most people, they make everything too extreme. So it becomes a case of, okay, like for example, Me Too is another good example, okay? Is this really about sexual discrimination we experience as women, or is it more a case of, we simply hate men because of how they've treated us historically and how some of them treat us even to this day? And that's exactly what I'm trying to say. And if you don't have a leader who makes it clear our movement is about this and not that, then you're going to have things all over the place, just like civilizations that existed thousands of years ago that believed, okay, we'll have a council, and how much shit did they get done? Nothing. They didn't get shit done. Versus nations that had leaders. It's like comparing Athens to the Macedonians. Look at how much Athens actually did. Yes, they had great leaders and stuff, but actually when you look at the history of their civilization, they didn't really do much when it came to becoming successful and prosperous. It's actually more the Macedonians who had a leader, as we all know, Philip the Great, and his most famous son that he definitely outlawed, Alexander the Great, who expanded empire, brought extreme prosperity to Greece. And that's exactly what I'm trying to say. So comparing the two is definitely not a good thing. Because at the end of the day, as I'm certain we're all aware of intellects in particular, people in this world can't make up their fucking minds. A lot of people, the majority of people, I hate to say this, so I'm not trying to be edgy or some edgelord, can't make up their mind on fucking anything. And as a result, people go from talking about one thing to another and they can't have an exact decision when it comes to how they do things. And as a result, that is why movements fall apart because of infighting, you know, and and lack of vision. So people become disillusioned and people leave, and we see what happens with all the movements we had. And that's the truth about why modern movements fail. And this is all I have to say, and I hope you learned something new. And this is it. Bye.